Hello, everyone. This is Ramirez with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts, and today we're going to talk about some Harnischfechten questions. But first, I had an interesting thing happen. We had a guest visitor come to try out Harnischfechten at our club because he doesn't have anywhere regionally to practice, and he was interested. Um, I was hesitant because our program's an advanced program for our students, but his gear seemed at the appropriate level, so I said, "We'll test you out. We'll see how it goes." And when he came in, he was signing some paperwork. He was like, "Hey, you're like Ramirez, who has a YouTube channel." And I was like, "Yes, yes, I am." Actually, one of my students was like, "Yep, that's him." So cool to be recognized on the internet and in real life. So that was kind of fun. But recently I had an online conversation with someone, and they had a bunch of questions, and there kind of comes a point where it's like, dude, you have to kind of either do it or don't do it. But he was asking about events and questions about doing Harnishfechten events, and I won't give his name out, but I just want to address these questions kind of publicly because I'm sure if he had those questions, that other people have those questions as well. So let's go ahead, let's get started, and hopefully this will help educate you. But at the end of the day, if you really want to do Harnishfechten events, you got to go out and do them. You can't just be like asking questions and deciding whether or not it's for you. Either is or it isn't, and you got to go ahead and do it. So when I talk about Harnishfechten events, I mean, you should have a local group that you're actually learning or practicing or studying Harnishfechten. That's not included. I'm also not going to include any type of reenactment events like muster, where it's not about an actual passage of arms. We're doing Harnishfechten. It's largely more the reenactment. Also, I'm going to speak from my experience. I'm in the United States. Events in Europe and Asia could be very different, or Eurasia. I know there are some events in Australia. I'm not going to comment on those because they have their own standards, and it wouldn't be my place to comment on those. So the first question is my armor good? And what do I mean by that? What about the use of titanium armor, stainless steel, mild steel, hardened steel? What's the requirement? And I'm going to tell you that it really depends on the event. So if you're like, what armor should I have if I'm going to go to a Harnishfechten indeed or a Passage of Arms event? Ideally, you should have hardened steel. Um, you could have mild steel, stainless steel, and you're probably 9 times out of 10 not going to have an issue. High historical events, and once again, you got to check the specifics on your event. May not allow you to have those things, or may not allow stainless. They certainly may not allow titanium. Titanium is largely seen as an unfair advantage, and also ahistorical. So it really depends on the event. Some events may not even care. They're happy to have someone participate, and they may turn a blind eye to that. But once again, you want, and there's going to be a recurring theme, you want to check with the event. You want to read their rule set. You want, because rule sets can change. The more historical it is, the less likely non-historical things will be an issue. Now, I've used my titanium brig at deed events and not had an issue. I've had my stainless steel cuirass at events where I couldn't have my titanium, and that wasn't a big deal. Um, I've had my mild steel, which I don't like wearing because it's really heavy, and that's never been an issue. I don't have any hardened steel armor, but obviously, I've never met anyone ever thrown out for having hardened steel at an event. So the main thing is your armor good enough to participate? Probably in your local club, absolutely. They're probably happy that you just have gear to fight. Um, are you necessarily going to be good at every deed of arm event? Maybe, maybe not. The key is check with the event before you decide this is what I'm going to commit to going to. because nothing would be worse than showing up and them saying, yeah, you can't wear that. Now, because I'm talking about harness events, there are some other things that you might need. If you are doing a passage of arms, deed of arms type event, usually it's kind of a weekend event. And when you're not in armor, you are expected to be in appropriate attire. That means generally 13th, 14th, 15th century clothing. Generally, most of them aren't specific. If they are, they will tell you. In other words, an event might be like, we are doing 15th century or 15th century Italian. This is more common in Europe than it is in America. In America, generally, they're like just generally kind of fit in. But they do want you to be historically accurate. So they don't want you running around like a Ren Fair tunic and, that kind of thing. They do want you to have historically accurate attire that can be very simple as a linen tunic and hose and a belt, and you're good to go. But they probably don't want you in your Timu warrior tunic and ridiculously poofy pants with Viking wraps on them. Probably not what they're looking for. What they're looking for is something close to the historical period in which passage of arms events exist. So, also, you're probably going to want, at the very least, a drinking vessel, but probably also eating gear as well if they're going to be serving any type of food. You shouldn't necessarily expect they're going to have extra plates, cups, etc. Some do, some don't. But once again, you want to check with the event regarding that. Also, regarding clothing, kind of depends on the event, so kind of read about the event. There are like workshop type events that may not require you to be in historical attire, but generally, passage of arms events or will require it. Things like tournaments, like HEMA style tournaments, will not, and a lot of workshop style events will not, unless they are workshops with a specific passage of arms. Then they may require you to have historical gear to attend the passage of arm at a workshop event. And once again, that kind of depends on which ones are out there. Now, the next question that is very common is, I'm doing Harnischfechten, I'm doing it with my club, I'm doing it with a group of people. How do I find these events? And that's been interesting in my experience because I've had a lot of people who have been on their lists and I've said, hey, I'm going to this event. And they didn't even know it existed. So if you're doing Harnischfechten, you should probably definitely jump on the Facebook Harnischfechten group. There is one called HEMA Harnischfechten. It's very popular, and usually a lot of events will post to that particular group. So that'll give you a heads up where these things are. I'll name a few as we get a little later in the video, but that's kind of your first thing if you are part of a group that doesn't do a lot of passage of arms or a lot of deed of arms events. If your local group does do a lot of them, you probably know about these different types of events already. So I'm going to kind of break down, there are 3 major types of events. I'm not including stuff that, as I said, is combat, let's say HEMA group tactic melee events, things like Yeehaw, because they aren't specifically for Harnischfechten. They have differing things, but I do want to boil it down to deed of arm, passage of arm events, HEMA tournament style events, and workshop events. So these are 3 different kind of categories of events you could do if you want to go beyond your local group doing Harnischfechten practice. So the first and probably the grandest are deed of arms events, passage of arms. These are going to be the ones that are basically a historically accurate tournament, and they're going to be probably the most strict about their rules. And an example would be Deed of the Swan in Kansas, Deed of the Argent Lion in Mississippi, I believe, and Decameron, which I think is in. I'm honestly not sure where Decameron is, but if you look it up, it's somewhere in the Midwest South. I'm just not sure exactly where that is because I haven't been to that one, but I've heard good things. And when you're looking at events like that, plan that you might have to be camping there. Some of them have cabins or stuff you can rent out, but generally you're going to be on site in a location that normally people would camp at. So you're going to need camping gear on top of your clothing and your eating and drinking utensils and things like that. Then there are events. And when I say events, I mean HEMA events. And HEMA events are going to be stuff like these. The first two, they don't run anymore. One was Long Point used to have a armored tournament. Hilt used to have an armored tournament. And of course, Combat Con used to have a spear armored tournament. That does, just because those don't exist doesn't mean there aren't some that do. Gellenfechten has an armored tournament at their HEMA tournament. So once again, it's a HEMA tournament with regular longsword and rapier and all those other things, but they also have an armored tournament. So you can look. There aren't many that are HEMA tournaments that have an armored division and armored combat tournament. They also tend to run a little bit differently because just like HEMA tournaments, they're straightforward point-based. You win, you lose, you move up, down the bracket. Passage of Arms Steed events run entirely differently, and we could talk about that in a different video. Lastly is that there are workshops that oftentimes include a Passage of Arms. They're far and few between, but I can name two. La Campagna is an event in North Carolina. They already did their event this year. They are going to do another one next year. They just posted their dates for that. And in that, there are workshops and classes. And then there's also a Passage of Arms. So this past year was an invitational, which means not everyone got to be in the official deed. But when it ended, I had several students go. I was not there, but I did hear that they opened the list to everyone after they did the official deed of arms. So there were lots of opportunities for people in armor to fight each other, and much fun was had by all. The other one is WMAW, that is Western Martial Arts Weekend. That is in, I want to say, Racine, Wisconsin. I have not been to that, but every other year they have a deed of arms at their event. I'm not sure how they do that, if that is an invitational, if everyone can participate, but if you want to look up WMAW or Western Martial Arts Weekend, you can find it online and you can look into that with greater detail. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Passage of Arms events, so I like to do one or two of those a year if I can. Not a huge fan of the HEMA tournament style. It's a lot, but also it's a big commitment to bring out your armor to one of those events, and I don't know that that it's that important to me, but for someone who's doing a lot of HEMA and wants to also do armor, if you're willing to drag all your equipment out to these, they can be a lot of fun. And obviously, if I have people in my comments section who want to recommend other events for Harnischfechten, they're certainly welcome to post in the comments below. I want to make one more distinction about events, and that is the SCA. Now, if you're in the SCA, you know their armored combat system is not Harnischfechten. However, they run a Harnischfechten experiment in several kingdoms in the SCA where they are doing Harnischfechten Passage of Arms type of events at regular SCA events. So, for example, Pennsic War is coming up. If you're going and you're doing Harnischfechten, hi, I'm one of your marshals for the Passage of Arms event at Penzic, which is on their middle weekend on Sunday, and I believe it starts at 10 a.m. On the steel weapons list. There's more information about that through the SCA and the SCA Harnischfechten channel on Facebook. So if you're interested in that, I would reference you to them, but you can also ask me questions in the comments, and I'm happy to explain that. But recently, a lot of the major war events for the SCA have included a Harnischfechten event. So they did have a Harnischfechten deed at Gulf Wars, and more events are offering Harnischfechten deed of arms type tournaments alongside their regular tournaments. Now, this is not every SCA event. I want to be very clear about that. So if you are interested, I would reach out to the event or to your local SCA chapter to find out if they offer a Harnischfechten event or a Harnischfechten practice. It's not everybody that does. It's a very small subset in the grand scale of things. But we are seeing some of the bigger SCA events, as I said, like Penzic, like Gulf Wars, start to offer Harnischfechten deeds, which is really cool. So hopefully we will, if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Well, once again, my name is Ramirez. I'm with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts. We're based out of Norfolk, Virginia. And I will see you in the next video.